Yeah, and welcome back, everybody, at this Amsterdam Conference on Tolerance. I hope everybody is doing good. And you had a little break, something to drink, stretch your legs. And yeah, here we are with the last very interesting section of today's conference. And I would like to introduce, oh, I'm so happy. I have one guest here at my table. But I'm also very happy with the guests that I have online. So because they're international guests, and that is something that has become really, yeah, how can I say, easier, more accepted since Corona. I would like to introduce to you first. At my right-hand side is Liefnat Faber. Welcome. You're a writer, a film scholar, and cultural programmer. And as Senior Alfred Landecker Democracy Fellow, you are committed to create Jewish intersectional activism in the broader Dutch emancipation movement. A mouthful, like he just said. She's also co-founder of the Jewish Cultural Hub OIV. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then we have online, I see Michael Jurm. Hi, Michael. Hi. You're a professor of sociology in Stockholm and specializing in conceptualizing tolerance, measuring tolerance, and change of prejudices. Is that correct?
Yeah, about correct.
Of course, you're doing a lot more, and but I would like to start this session with Ryan Muldoon, who is associate professor of philosophy in Buffalo, specializing in social contract and diversity. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, how are you doing?
How are you? How is it in Buffalo?
We have about 2 feet of snow outside, so we're doing that well, I suppose.
All right. So it's nice and white, and but you have to stay inside.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good. We'll send you some warmth from here. I mean, yeah. Ryan, I'm very curious to hear. We heard a lot about tolerance already today. And a lot has been said, but I'm really curious to hear your story about tolerance. So the floor is yours.
Great. So I think there's a really important connection between tolerance and diversity. So let's just go to the next slide there if we can. If we think about like an intuitive understanding of tolerance, we can see it as a fairly minimal standard in one sense, but a rather challenging standard in another. Tolerance is really about finding ways of accepting differences of opinion or values or even behaviors. And a core feature of tolerance is it's got to be about stuff that you don't like. It's easy to tolerate things you already agree with. That's not really getting at a substantive account of tolerance. But what makes tolerance challenging and has been challenging throughout, the history of liberal society really is, it seems like it'd be much more pleasant if everyone just agreed with you and did the things that you would like them to do. Or held your values, but that's I think an undesirable goal for everyone to just agree. But it's also an impossible one, even if we decided it was desirable in some sense, just because diversity itself is inevitable in any kind of a free society. We're always going to come up with new ideas. We're always going to have reasons to value different sorts of things, and we're going, in particular, whether it's sort of political values or social values or different ways of living your life, what you think constitutes a good life or a good community, we're going to have really large disagreements. The American philosopher John Rawls referred to these as the burdens of judgment. even if we're kind of ideally rational agents living in a livable society, we're just going to have some basic disagreements, not because anyone's doing anything wrong, but just because there are lots of different ways to value things. There's lots of different ways to order our values, pick which one is more important than the other. And because of that, we're going to have kind of core disagreements. So if we could advance the slides in the background there by 2, that would be helpful. So it gets to the next one. Thanks. So I think Amsterdam's a really wonderful example of kind of the promise of cities. And the earlier general session was going more in detail there, but I think a really interesting feature of kind of a historically trade-oriented city is that we can kind of see how diversity piles up in a really beneficial way as we kind of add people and add different kinds of people to a place. So, straightforwardly, trade can generate wealth, but it brings about cultural production. It brings more people in because of that culture and that wealth. But what becomes really quite powerful rather quickly is that each of us as individuals start gaining more abilities when we're around more different kinds of people, because our abilities aren't merely kind of what we ourselves can do on a desert island or something like that. Our capacities are expanded when we're in society with other people. We can live more kinds of lives. We can perform more tasks. We can specialize, but we also, beyond that, get to take advantage of all the other stuff everyone else is doing. So whether that's as kind of consumers in an economy, or as kind of people enjoying culture, or people kind of exploring what kind of life they would like to lead, more people and more diversity enables more kinds of lives for us, more kinds of kind of cultural growth, cultural opportunities that's just not possible in a less diverse kind of a place. And so the way some of my work tries to articulate this is being around more and more diverse people increases your freedom. It increases the ways in which you can exercise your own autonomy. And being in this kind of more populous and more diverse setting like a city provides kind of creates the preconditions for kind of substantial expansion of human freedom, which is a magnificent thing. It's a matter of how do we take advantage of that expansion of freedom while recognizing that there are non-trivial burdens that can arise from being in an environment where lots of people disagree with you. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll get into that a little bit. So as I mentioned, just being kind of piled up with a lot of people, especially those who disagree with you, doesn't necessarily guarantee good results. People can, just as easily fight with each other as decide to cooperate. But this is where tolerance as a set of kind of overarching values that help shape the rules of cooperation for ourselves does a lot of important and valuable work for us. A core feature of a more tolerant society is that we can conceive of ourselves as a sort of civic friend who might disagree about some things, rather than set ourselves up as being enemies. So tolerance creates a space where there's acceptable disagreement, where we can agree that we're not going to necessarily resolve our values disputes, but that doesn't prohibit cooperation in other dimensions. And I think a powerful feature of cities and the common institutions that we find in cities, especially trade-oriented ones, is that it's easier to see that the benefits of diversity significantly outweigh their costs. We become more economically productive. We're culturally richer. We have more opportunities to to find people like us in a big, diverse city, because we're not yet sure what kind of a person we are until we get exposed to more possibilities. And then we can take advantage of those extra opportunities. So a core feature of these many overlapping kind of mini communities found in a city is the idea that my freedom is expanded when yours is as well. I gain more capacities when you do, because the more stuff that you can do, it kind of frees me up to do more as well. I get the benefits of the division of labor, but also I get the benefit of the new possibilities that are created by others. Oftentimes, when we conceive of kind of a shallow notion of freedom, we're just thinking about how many times am I not restricted from behavior? Can I do whatever I feel like in this moment? So some philosophers call that license rather than freedom. I'm licensed to do kind of whatever I feel like. But that's, I think, an impoverished notion compared to a more interesting conception of freedom that you can find in Amartya Sen or Adam Smith or David Hume or others for that matter, where the idea is, what are the sets of possibilities for me that are made available? And that's a fundamentally social idea. The more kinds of people around expands that set of possibility for me, and that expands my freedom. So let's go to the next slide. So if we're trying to kind of put this together a little bit into kind of what are core features of institutions that we would want to see in a sort of social contract for tolerant cities, I think there are a few elements that are quite important, and I'd be delighted to discuss this more later. So one is liberalism does best when there's broad permissions. Being allowed to experiment is important. That one fosters more diversity, but also allows us to see the benefits of it. So tolerance is really crucial in allowing for broad possibilities. It makes the room for us to not just say no up front, but let people experiment different ways of living, different kinds of values. The other, I think, really important element here that is sometimes underappreciated in discussions around this is that it's not that we have to have like one single shared community. We can have lots of them. And we should have lots of kind of interconnected communities. I can be a member of multiple communities in a single place, and allowing lots of kind of mini communities to develop amongst a broader populace is great, because it lets you sometimes retreat a little bit and be around people that share a certain kind of value or promote a certain kind of end. But then you can re-engage with others, and the people that are in that initial community might be in 10 different other kinds of communities that you're not a member of. And so this fosters a sort of exchange while still letting you kind of pull back a little bit when you want to share more with others. The other idea that's sort of related to these two is that a tolerant city doesn't aim to never impose any burdens on anybody. If we aimed for kind of never rocking the boat with anybody, we would all feel frustrated all the time, because the number of areas over which we disagree is going to be big enough that we're going to start restricting everyone's behavior all the time. But instead, what we should try to aim for is some notion of equal burden sharing, where we kind of have some sort of a bargain with each other, where I can create this sort of imposition for you if I accept an imposition from you, and the more that we're willing to do that, the more space we make for each other, and the more we can learn from each other. Then lastly, on that idea of learning is, what are the kinds of institutions that we should seek to promote in cities? And so here is where we want to find ways to make more salient the benefits of diversity. So I think this comes out from trade and art and culture, music, food, etc., where we can see the benefit of kind of novel ideas or kind of novel ways of being that we might not have been otherwise exposed to. We can see some immediate benefits of these things, whether it's in an educational institution or in a work setting or just your cultural life. These sorts of institutions kind of make very visible to you the value of different ways of life. Even if you don't want to partake in that way of life, you can get some of the benefits from it. And so with that, I think I'll stop here and cede the floor to others.
Thank you, Ryan. I have to say, it's so nice to hear how you, let's say, how can I put it right? That things that people often look at as being negative, you clearly make them look very positive. And let me see. My freedom is expanded when yours is as well. I mean, those kind of statements. So they make me think about a thing. Aren't we? Maybe we're not aware enough about all the positive effects of our differences, and should the focus be more on that? Let's say in a city as Amsterdam.
Absolutely. So I think a mistake we often make when we're envisioning like a nice liberal society is we're thinking about what philosophers or economists would call like a steady state, some equilibrium where everyone's viewing having a set of values or a particular division of various social goods. But the power of liberalism really, and again, I think like Amsterdam's history is a magnificent example of this sort of phenomenon, is it's really about discovery. It's about ways of enhancing our learning so we can do better later. The more that we are able to learn from each other, the wealthier we can become, the more culturally rich we can become. It's a fool's errand to imagine that we've kind of learned everything there is to learn and figured out the best way of life. We haven't. And there are so many changes in the world, whether they're technological or whatever else, that the rules that we had before might not apply very well or work as well to our new situation or in the future. And so if we orient ourselves around viewing each other as resources for learning, I think a lot more opens up for us. We become a lot more able to manage our disagreements because we might both be wrong, but we might better enable each other to find out a better answer.
Yeah, and the other thing you said was we can have different communities within this large community. Is it still important to even as those small communities to realize that you're in this large community?
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really important here is what sometimes gets called cross-cutting connections, or in some of the sociology literature, it's referred to as bridging capital. We don't want to have lots of individual kind of ghettoized communities that self-isolate. We want to have lots of communities, and any given individual can be members of many of them at once. And so then we're kind of engaged in this kind of learning across these different communities. They're relatively open to new members, or if you decide this community is not for you, you can exit and find a new place for yourself. This is really valuable. Having these kind of mini, what John Stuart Mill would call experiments in living, are extraordinarily valuable.
Isn't that also where a large city is about?
Absolutely. This is, I mean, if you, I do a little bit of work in kind of developing countries, and if you look at kind of where you get more and more rights and more freedom in general, it's when you're able to move to a bigger place with more people. You can become anonymous if you want. You can find a new community. There's not a lot of nosy neighbors imposing one particular set of values on you if you've ever lived in a small town. if you live in a bigger place, you can kind of pick who you want to be around and who judges you in terms of the plan of life that you choose for yourself.
Exactly.
That's amazingly freeing.
Yeah, exactly. I have a question here, and it states, when there is no neutral public reason, what is the point of view from which all can be convinced about the benefits of diversity and, of course, diverse social contract?
That's a great question. So I've written a lot of papers in the book on that very subject. So the thing that I can say briefly is, yeah, I don't think there's a really compelling version of neutral here where everyone can agree, no matter what sort of value system you have, that this is some kind of imagined neutral space where we can all agree on core values, in part because there's just so many ways of picking which values are more important. Even if we all agree on the 10 most important values or the 5 most important values, think of all the different ways you could rearrange the order of those that can create disagreements or not. So what I think makes more sense is everyone should be able to bring their own values to the table, but we should be willing to negotiate with each other over what rules we can all have kind of our individual reasons to agree to. And we need some rules to kind of constrain our behaviors and facilitate cooperation. But we don't need neutrality. What we need is some notion of everyone counts. If we have some idea of civic equality, where equality doesn't have to mean sameness, that's where we can really make progress. We can accept that we're different and accept that we still have equal standing in our city or our country or our community, and that we all get to participate and get to kind of shape the rules that we live by. If we have that more minimal standard where equality doesn't have to mean sameness, we still can generate rules that are fair without having to imagine that there's some kind of neutrality where we all agree about everything. I don't think that exists.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan. For now, I'll be back with you in a moment. But I'm very curious to hear about Michael, what it is you have to tell us. At first, I'm curious to hear what was something that sticked into your mind of what Ryan was just telling about.
I think it was a great presentation, and I think I actually agree with everything Ryan said.
Oh, that's good. That's not bad. Well, okay. So I'm curious to hear your story, Michael.
Sure. So this is going to be a little bit abstract. I hope everyone will follow. So you can change the slides. We started out with something that's like, why do we want to measure tolerance? I mean, tolerance is often invoked as something to which individuals and societies should aspire, as can be seen in, for example, the United Nations charters and multiple government statements. But our question is basically, what does this mean? Does this really mean in practice? Does it mean that those who hold prejudicial attitudes should fight against their dislike of particular outgroups? Or does it mean that everyone should respect other values, attitudes, even when they are contrary to their own? Or does it mean that society should always value or embrace diversity, which relates to what's usually referred to as the Popper's paradox? Basically, if we should tolerate intolerance. I mean, for example, should we embrace behaviors that are authoritarian or directly harmful to other people? Which is the limits of tolerance, of course. For us, these questions, the general debate, the empirical literature on tolerance, indicate two things. First, that there's a semantic problem of tolerance. We simply talk about different things when we talk about tolerance. And second, as we're talking about different things, we do not always agree how to measure it. And me, being a very empirical oriented sociologist, I have a problem with that. I want to be able to measure things. So what we did was we set out to bring some clarity in the semantic and empirical aspects of tolerance. We do not claim to be contributing to the very philosophical understanding of tolerance, but more to the empirical part of tolerance. Can change slides, please. Our start, as a starting point, we are critical, or I should say perhaps we are building on previous empirical studies of tolerance on 4 accounts. The first one being when people understand tolerance as forbearance. This is the classical political scientist view that often defines tolerance as something like this. A person is tolerant if he or she has the means to prevent X from doing Y, but refrain from doing so. The problem, as we see it with this understanding, is that one cannot be tolerant towards things one cannot change. And there are a lot of things we cannot change, like, for example, people's skin color or disabilities. Also, it means that we cannot tolerate what we do not dislike. We try to move beyond this and create a more general framework of tolerance. Secondly, tolerance is often equated with prejudice. This is the classical sociological understanding of tolerance, whereas tolerance is basically a general version of prejudice. And if we have 2 concepts that actually means the same thing, one of them is redundant. So we want to avoid this. And the third thing is tolerance as a non-abstract value. Often tolerance is measured in relation to specific groups, specific individuals, or specific behaviors. This makes it extremely difficult to transfer tolerance from one context to another, and thus difficult to compare tolerance over time and between geographical entities, for example. Thus, we set out to measure tolerance in the abstract, a measurement that is time, space, and value neutral. And finally, what we are building on is tolerance as a unidimensional concept. Most previous measurements of tolerance are unidimensional, in spite of the fact that most philosophical discussions on tolerance are multidimensional. Thus, we went back to philosophy and thought that how can we make a measurement of tolerance that is actually multidimensional? You can change slides, please. So without having a long discussion or pondering on this any further, we simply define tolerance as a value orientation towards difference. And we set out to measure 3 aspects of tolerance as a value orientation towards difference. And this is the dimensions or aspects we borrowed from a person called Forrest, named Forrest, which is related to Karl Popper's classical understanding of tolerance. So what we try to do, we try to measure tolerance as, firstly, as acceptance of diversity, where individuals and groups do not interfere with each other or their practices, but instead accept their existence, which would be the most basic understanding of tolerance, or the simplest version of tolerance. And the second one being respect for diversity, where individuals view different groups as morally and politically equal, even though they may differ fundamentally in beliefs, practices, and lifestyles. And the third one being appreciation of diversity, where individuals view others' beliefs, practices, or lifestyles or behaviors as something valuable and worthy of ethical esteem, which will be the most demanding reaction to diversity, or the most demanding version of tolerance. And the idea here is that there's a hierarchy between these 3 things. And the hierarchy is not necessarily in terms of what is good or bad, but in terms of what is most demanding of each individual. And this is what we set out to measure. So we kind of created some measurement and tested them in a lot of countries, and we came up to something that can measure these 3 concepts. And I'm not going to show you how we did that. We just did it. And I don't think this is the time for doing that. So you can change slide, please. So what we now have is a measurement that can conceptualize these 3 dimensions of tolerance, which is now consistent with conceptualization, because it's analytically distinct from prejudice and other concepts. It is abstract because it's not related to specific groups, ideas, traditions, or behavior. And it's politically, temporally, and value neutral. The value neutrality can be discussed. I'm not 100% convinced that we managed to fully succeed with that, but almost. And it's multidimensional because it consists of the 3 aforementioned aspects of tolerance. And importantly, we do not claim to have the final solution to the measurement of tolerance. Our main goal was to provide some semantic and empirical clarity to the tolerance debate, and hopefully this will be helpful for scientists and others who want to actually better understand tolerance, how it comes about, what its consequences are, and how it changes over time, to be basically to be able to measure it and to also in the end make political policies out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very interesting, and also what I liked. I mean, of course, we all know it's like that. But you stating that we sometimes think we talk about the same thing, but we are not, which is something. Of course, if we talk about tolerance, yeah, tolerance. I mean, but the fact to realize that even if we think that we talk about the same thing, we're not. Is good to realize as a starting point. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for now, Michael. Thank you for this presentation, and I'll be back later with you as well, and talk if we can see more also concerning the city of Amsterdam. And for now, I would like to speak to Liefnat Faber.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
At the table.
At the table. How good is that? Yeah. What are your thoughts after hearing all these presentations?
It's a bit overwhelming and beautiful and abstract and theoretical.
Also, yeah.
Yes. So I've been writing down. I've been taking notes, but it clashes for me somewhere in the reality of the everyday life in the city.
Because that's the thing, right? Between what's going on and what is happening every day.
Exactly.
Was there anything that you heard that you said, okay, there it's coming together?
No, but there was a specific point where I thought this is a point where it's not coming together in my experience or in my mind. And this was the moment when these three aspects of tolerance were mentioned: acceptance, respect, and appreciation. And so I think they're beautiful, and I think they're it's a whole range, right, of looking at tolerance. But the question for me is, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So I think looking at what's happening on the ground in the city, for me, the most important thing when we think about tolerance or the social contract of a city is meaningful connection making with one another. And so we can talk about what that means, because there's lots of things this can mean.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear exactly what it is you do. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm involved in a community, actually.
Yeah.
OIV is a new Jewish community in the city center of Amsterdam. We're open, inclusive, and unapologetically Jewish.
And it's called OIV.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's this, it's Och en Wee in Dutch, it's Yiddish, and it's basically this thing that a grandma would say when something bad happens, but we took it as a sort of, took it as as an empowerment instead of something negative. Yeah.
All right. And what is it that you're specifically aiming at with OIV?
Right. So it is a Jewish community, but it's an open Jewish community. So that means two things. One, everybody is welcome in the way they identify themselves as Jewish. And two, it's very important for us that we're in the city center and open towards the people of the city. So there's like this wish for a connection and communication with one another.
And how do you bring that abroad? How do you bring that together?
Well, I think in so there's lots of activities. Well, now not so much because of COVID.
Of course.
But one of the things that we do is a social justice project called OIV Acts.
All right.
And in this project, sort of, I'm looking at the intersection between anti-Semitism, which is something that we're dealing with in the city as Jews, and anti-racism, which, racism is a lot of people are dealing with it in the city. Yeah. And so we're looking at where these two intersect and what's happening in that intersection.
Can you already see some things? Can you already give me some results of that? I mean, where they're coming together, what happens there?
Oh, then you have conversations.
All right.
When you manage to sort of align, and it's about getting groups together, I guess. It's about in this specific instance, getting minority groups or groups that are being discriminated against, whether for their race, religion, all these kinds of things, disabilities, where they come from. When you get those together, then you start talking about the things also you have in common. This is where sort of it starts. But where it gets really interesting is where the friction happens. So where, I'll just take a sip.
Yeah, go ahead. So you say where the friction happens, because that is the point. If you talk about that,
that's a break-off point. Oftentimes, like this is when it gets difficult. So there's, for example, there's a lot of Jewish Muslim groups that are speaking. There's not a lack of communication, I guess, but when we're speaking about the things we're uncomfortable with, where the differences become apparent, or the way we think about certain things, this is where I think something magical can happen. But then the question is how.
That is exactly what you're telling me now. Is exactly what Sarita said this morning about when you talk about things and things are getting uncomfortable, then things are really going to happen, or things are. You have to talk about those uncomfortable things.
Exactly.
If you look at, let's say, let me ask you this: what is important? In your connection with other people, because one of the things about tolerance is what do we choose? Do we choose live and let live, or do we choose no? Your eyes are getting big. Like no, that's not what I would choose. Or I want to know you. I want to know who you are, and from there on, I want to get to know you so I can understand you better. So why is that important to that connection?
It's two levels. It's one, what you like as a person. So I like the second one a lot more, but that's me, right? But I think that the underlying question about this is one about, I think, racism in our cities. So we can talk about tolerance, we can talk about these levels, but what I was getting at about that doesn't happen in a vacuum. With that, I mean that we're not treated equally in this city or in the Netherlands and in many other cities across the world. And so it's good to speak about how you would, deal with your differences. It's nice to have a cup of tea with your neighbor, talk about cultural differences, etc. But at the end of the day, if parts of society are structurally or institutionally discriminated against, then I guess we don't have a sort of equal starting point to even start to talk about what tolerance could look like. Because if this would be the case, that we have this equality, we don't have racism, we don't have anti-Semitism, we don't have discrimination and exclusion, now we can start speaking about, then it's okay. Sure, you can be tolerant by, you do you and I do me. It's not a problem, right? We can have different communities, they can interact, they can just do their own thing. It's all good. Then you can speak about levels of, right, your freedom increases, my freedom increases, there's more creativity, more is possible. But I think if we're not looking one another straight into the eye and saying, okay, but wait a second, we need to fix something first before we can do all these things, I think it's a conversation that will go in rounds and remain, in this sense, hypothetical or theoretical.
Yeah, and do you think that conversation, let's say specifically in the city of Amsterdam, is being held sufficiently in order to get this tolerance?
I think Amsterdam is a really good example of setting a few milestones. So when we're speaking about having these kind of meaningful connections to one another, it's you and me. It's on this level of just people, it's on the level of communities, but it's also, I guess, a bit more vertical between us and our institutions or, politicians. And I think that the mayor, recognizing and, making an apology for sort of the slave history in Amsterdam last year is a very important benchmark of something's happening. So that's like on that level. And on the level of different groups coming together and speaking, I think in the last year we've made quite a lot of progress. And an example of that is that as OIV, we're also involved in the coalition Together Against Racism, Samen tegen Racisme, which is actually also of the place we're in. Het Pakhuis de Zwijger is one of the organizations that are part of this coalition. And in this coalition, there's a Jewish, Muslim, Dutch Black and Parijs de Zwijger is like this facilitator.
Yeah.
And we have many, many conversations.
Yeah. So you say it is happening.
I think it is happening,
Yes.
and it needs to happen at different levels in different ways. And sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to bring in the other two speakers as well, Ryan and Michael. Is there anybody who wants to react on what Liefnat just was telling us? And I can. Well, one of the things you said was with this in the different small communities, but bringing these small communities together as a bigger group, and that is just exactly what you were stating, Ryan.
Yeah. So one thing I thought of during that really wonderful discussion is that there's all sorts of, I think, underappreciated empirical work that's done in kind of academic settings, looking at, you know, whether diverse groups are more productive or not compared to more homogenous ones and things like this. And one thing that's kind of striking is that if you look at, you know, whether it's firms or people in a lab setting doing some contrived task together and things like this, diverse groups tend to do better, but they feel like they've done worse.
How come, Ryan? How come?
So it's because they're disagreeing the whole time. Homogenous groups feel really great about doing a task together because they're all agreeing on the best way of doing the task. And so they think, oh, well, if everyone's agreeing, we must be performing amazingly well. You know, we're just, you know, doing great. But actually they perform a little worse than diverse groups. But the diverse groups are arguing with each other the whole time and finding you know, all these sorts of disagreements. But it's the arguing and the disagreements that make them do better.
That sounds very Jewish.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Liefnat, do you recognize this? I mean, but it is true, right? If we speak with people and we disagree, we tend to think that the conversation didn't go well or that something didn't go well, instead of thinking, oh, that was nice. We have disagreements, so I heard your part of the story, you heard mine, and no, okay, tell me about it.
No, I follow you, and I guess this is normally what happens. I love a good disagreement.
You love a good disagreement?
I love a good disagreement.
Because?
Because it makes you think of different things. It makes you think of different answers to your question, of different routes, but in a safe setting, right?
All right.
And so again, we come
with
down
respect.
to with respect, or the ground rules of I shall not discriminate against you. But I think that one thing that does sort of relate to this is that we accept not only one another's difference, but one another's messiness as well. So when we're dealing with sort of minority communities that have their own trauma and their own, you know, problems inside, whenever you as a community or as part of a community talk to another human who's part of a community, just remember that there is messiness, that there is stuff that has been going on, intergenerational.
It's not isolated.
It's not isolated. And so in this friction and in this messiness, I think we have to just let one another be. But the thing that, let me see if I can place this right. This is all about like the disagreements and where the friction is, and that we should then, you know, tolerate this, and that it's easy to sort of agree. But I think there's a lot of things that we can agree on that we find very difficult to own up to.
For example?
Well, for example, this thing of I'd like to not be discriminated against, and I'd like to sit with you and know that you're not discriminated against, and somehow it's very difficult for many people and groups to sort of come out and say, okay, I'm not only in solidarity with you, I'm going to be your ally now, and we're going to fix a few things. And this seems to be difficult. So this is what fascinates me, right? Something we should agree on becomes this different. So it's also in this thing, it's not black and white, the agreement and the disagreement.
Disagreement, yeah. I have a question here, and it states, how can we define acceptable disagreement? Isn't this concept inherently normative? Ooh.
Acceptable
disagreement.
And if this is not inherently normative?
Yeah. Is this concept inherently normative? Is it normative?
Accepted disagreement.
Yeah, when is it acceptable? When is the disagreement acceptable?
I think in many occasions.
As long as we can discuss about it.
Well, I think there are limits, and one limit is, and this is again the Popper that was mentioned, but you know, when an opinion in a disagreement sort of is hurting me in is a threat to my safety and to my well-being. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, would you like to add on that, Michael or Ryan?
I think all disagreements are acceptable as long as the premises for discussions are reasonable.
Yeah. All right. And do you think that talking about these disagreements and discussing this will increase the tolerance?
I wish.
But you don't believe it?
I mean, this isn't this the classical. It's like sometimes we have over beliefs about if you just sit down and discuss things, the world will be better. In certain occasions, that might be the case. But the problem is that what we see today, especially, I mean, Ryan is from the States, and when we see a breakdown in the premises of that discussion, if we don't follow the rules of discussion, well, there's no discussion can ever take place. Because I come up with a statement that's obviously empirically wrong, and it's known to be wrong. And Ryan comes to say to me, well, I have some evidence here that this is wrong. I'm just saying, I don't believe you. Then we cannot have a discussion anymore. It's totally pointless, because whatever I say, well, you know, you're just wrong. And he shows me even more numbers and saying, well, but you know, what you're saying is wrong. I'm just, nah, I don't believe you. I don't trust you. It's just fake. Then it's a problem, because we can't have a discussion anymore. So
then the discussion stopped.
The discussion stopped. It didn't even start. I mean, if you can't answer, I think that the first and most basic question to be asked in that kind of situation is there any evidence that would make you change your opinion? If the answer to that question is no, then you can't have a discussion.
Do you agree on that, Ryan?
Yes and no. So I agree. So here's the sense I agree. If it's just two of us talking and one just is what a philosopher would call like reasons unresponsive. If, you know, no matter what evidence I provide or arguments I make, you're just stubborn and never going to move. Well, in that sense, yes, the disagreement between you and I isn't going anywhere. But there are third parties. There are other people that might be listening to our disagreement.
Especially in a large city, right?
Yeah, so in a large city or a country, or even in just, you know, in a social group, the disagreement is not just between the two of us. There's onlookers as well. And so I might never be able to convince you, but I might be able to pull bystanders along. And maybe I can never convince you, but if we keep going at it, maybe your kids will be in a different sort of environment where they're more willing to take evidence seriously and things like that. So I think it's really important to recognize that, yes, some disagreements are just not going to get resolved between particular parties, but that doesn't mean that those arguments are pointless, because the next round might go better when it's new people having that discussion. And if we look at human history, there's some reason to be optimistic here. We're getting better and better at resolving our disagreements with each other and finding more zones of tolerance and acceptable disagreement. And we're doing a better job of kind of cordoning off the sorts of values that say, like, you don't get to count as a person. We're more able to expand a notion of civic friendship or equality or however you want to conceive it to more and more people successfully. And so even though there are lots of things like in the United States that don't look great right now, there's still really good reasons for a fair amount of optimism here that we're getting better at this stuff in a lot of respects.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, well, Ryan, I'm really happy to hear that, and I do. It's always good to zoom out a little bit and look at the broader, the broader view, so to say. And we could talk a little bit longer, but for now, I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Mayor Rutger Groot-Wassink, because I'm really curious what you will take with you from today's conference on tolerance. Hi, Rutger.
Hi. Wow, that's a very complicated question.
It is. I know.
Well, I'm completely overwhelmed by the richness of the information that this conference has brought up, and I don't quite feel comfortable to completely reflect on it. And I think that first of all, let me thank everybody who participated, and I'm very inspired by shared experiences and also by theoretical dimensions of what we're talking about. So I'm very happy that we organized this conference, and I have to say that what I also in our session, what we have spoken about is that there's the promotion of tolerance, the prevention of intolerance, and what tolerance really means. What is tolerance when you look at how do we promote real tolerance over indifference? And I think that what resonates in all discussions is that this is a responsibility of all of us, and this is a responsibility with all kinds of dimensions in society. This isn't something that only the local or national government has to play a role in. This is a people's thing, and I really liked what the previous speaker said, that meaningful connection, because I think that meaningful connection is also very important in the promotion of tolerance, and that to see one another and to hear one another and maybe to disagree within borders of the law is very, very helpful. And I was thinking about this social contract, because social contract also has an ideological dimension in it, and I don't want to get into that too much. I like the concept and I like the idea, but I'm not quite sure what should be in this contract. And maybe that is something that you can reflect upon as well. And I'm quite sure that if we have a social contract, I think that it can only be something in motion, because if you carve it in stone, that's just not enough. That's just not good enough. And it's something that we should feel from the inside, and it has to do with curiosity. It has to do with citizenship, and it has to do with trying to make a society, and try in the Dutch. The Dutch word for society is samenleving, which has the word samen. And what does it mean to get together in the Dutch word for society? And I think that is still the quest that we are upon. And today helped us, but this cannot be an end. This is only a beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Rutger. And well, like you're saying, it's especially, I would say, everybody together. Only then tolerance can be. Can get a certain form, and especially the form we are all looking for. And one of the things that we heard today, to me, a very, very important fact is that it's a continuous process, and it's not something that you know, if you do that, if you push that button, then we have an intolerant community. No, it's like an ongoing process, and I think days as today, where we speak with each other, everybody with their different insights coming from different perspectives, it really gives a new way of thinking. It shifts, and it's well, at least I find it very very good to look at. And but thank you for now, Rutger. Thank you for being here with us today. And I'm sure the city of Amsterdam is taking this very highly. And I'm really curious about, for example, imagine in next year, if we look back at this moment, you know, what are we looking at then, and what steps have been made. And another very important thing was what Ryan said about the realization of the fact that disagreement is a good thing as well, and from disagreement come new things, as long as we keep on talking with each other. So that is it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rutger. If I can have the for 1 second, Ryan and Michael back. Is that possible? Yes. Great. All right, and I would love to pose this last questions from the audience that came in, and I can let me see, because that's the problem with this digital thing. Questions come in, you know, after we have been discussing something, so we're trying to get it back. But it's a question from Marcel Mausen. Can you expand this argument to respect some rules of the game? When discussion and arguing about differences when it comes to moral and cultural differences as opposed to truth claims, should people not aim to convince others of some moral truth? Ooh, that's difficult to get that back, I guess. Let me see. Okay, and on the last debate, what can you do in a situation where where the space for disagreement is so vast that you can't have a conversation? What can you do in that kind of situation? But I think, Ryan, you already said something on that. Where the space for disagreement is so vast that you can't have a conversation. You said, you know, look, there are more parties, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I just quickly respond to those two questions. So for sure, there's lots of instances where, you know, you and I are just not going to agree on stuff. And part of the answer to that is, for a lot of that, that's just okay, and the way it's going to be. There's so many things over which we're going to disagree. The key is kind of like keeping ourselves in a kind of container of rules that means that those disagreements stay civil in some sense, so that they don't kind of spill over into kind of rights violating consequences. So whether that's violence or something else. And for sure, part of this is, it's not just having, you know, one-on-one debates resolved with you know, one person victorious in the battle of ideas or something like this, but us viewing ourselves and engaged in a kind of process of discovery with each other. We might find that we don't all have to agree on what you take to be your most crucial moral value. We can have a set of rules that allow for us to peaceably cooperate, even if you know, you and I differ there. And that's what makes kind of politics separate from morality. We you know, political philosophy or politics, in my view, is kind of enabling us all to live together which is separate from us all agreeing on moral truths. It's figuring out the space over which we can cooperate successfully, and that's a different task, and that's going to leave a lot of room for ambiguity and disagreement and difference.
Yeah, yeah, it is. You want to add something?
Yes, because I think from what I've seen around me is that when the space for disagreement becomes so big, it is often because we're individuals and we're part of a narrative that says X, Y, Z, and then there's another individual that's part of another narrative that says exactly the opposite. For example, you can feel that then the space, for disagreement is just too big. Like I can relate to this question, and I do think that in an era with a lot of social media, and these disagreements are then often played out, or this space for disagreement just like grows like an oil spill onto your screen and onto your daily lives. In that moment, I think that to reach out individually and to make contact with that person that maybe said something that is very hurtful or is very problematic, and to connect on a personal level, and not do it in front of the whole world or the entire social media platform or whatever. Don't bring somebody down. I mean, there's evil people in the world for sure, but most people are just not, and they have their own things they're dealing with and their own.
And that's also what you often hear, that if people do that, if they get in contact with somebody that said bad or mean things about them, whether it was on social media, which is it mostly is, if they get in contact and if they start the conversation, so that's the personal contact. Often things are getting different in a positive way.
You can share your perspective, and you can also learn why the other person has this big objection. Like, what are they afraid of? What are their worries? What are their concerns? Yeah. And so, if you can there's a moment where you could find one another there, based on these values that everybody also keeps talking about, exactly. that we have in common, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I was thinking was, because I just said, like, okay, imagine we have this conference, in about a year, would things be different? Or, if you have these talks, and let's say if you look back at it 5 years from now, what is it? And I was curious, Michael, how would you then measure the tolerance? How would you measure to see if things were getting better or worse? Or isn't there such a thing as tolerance is getting worse? Or how do you look at that?
No, that's clearly possible. That's clearly possible, and we can measure it. And what we've done with our dimensions of tolerance is, of course, related to all kinds of other concepts to see the consequences and what it relates to. And we know that it matters if you have a high degree of appreciation. You score extremely low on whatever that may be, like all kinds of prejudices, whether that's towards ethnic groups or homosexuality or it really doesn't matter. Whereas if you score high on acceptance but not on appreciation, it really doesn't correlate to anything. You're more like indifferent. So of course we can measure it, and it depends on what we want to strive for. But I think it's important to note that I totally agree with Ryan. He was hinting this, that over a long period of time, when I look at this, the world has become so much better. I mean, my main area of research is prejudice. And if you look at that, if you go back 100 years, the level of prejudice 100 years ago in all societies around the world compared to today, I mean, we are not even encountering the same society anymore. And funnily, what is happening, oddly, what is happening is that this is something important to keep in mind, that when societies are getting increasingly tolerant or less prejudiced, we are also more sensitive when things are not tolerant and extremely prejudiced. So it's a paradox. But when these things diminish, they will not disappear. The bad things, we are also reacting more negatively to them. You see what I'm saying? It's the same thing as that there are studies when it comes to, for instance, gender equality, that in societies that tend to be more gender equal, women are more sensitive to gender inequality than in societies that are more gender unequal. So basically, when tolerance increases, our acceptance for intolerance decreases.
That is really good to realize and to know. But I'm also happy still. Yeah, I guess I'm a positive person that we can, that even though we all realize present here today that we have to be aware. Working on tolerance, both for the city, Amsterdam, as for ourselves, but that we are making progress, and this how can I say, the knowledge that we have today about the importance of diversity and of inclusion and tolerance is bigger and higher. So I have good hopes. I really have good hopes, and I hope you all have that and can share that with me. But of course, we'll keep in touch, and we keep an eye on the tolerance and on our neighbors and on our close ones, and let's stay in contact on a personal level, right? Even if there's Corona.
Even if there's Corona.
Even if there's Corona. Okay. Well, then for now, I would like to thank you very much, Ryan Muldoon, Michael Yerm, for being with us here this afternoon. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
And Liefnat, thank you for being here, present at the table. It was a pleasure having you here.
It was totally a meaningful connection.
So. It was. Okay. Well, with that connection, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating in today's conference on tolerance. And have a good day. Bye-bye.